I think I'm getting a go point. I get a giant finger pointing at me saying that we're live. So I will wait till the normal clarification and confirmation that people can hear me, and then we'll get the show started. Welcome to all those who have joined chat so far. Just waiting for someone to say they hear me. Voice out into the ether. I hear woo. Okay, I think we're live. Everyone, welcome to DevStream number 6, Dev Diary number 6 on side quests. This is the Expeditions Rome DevStream. We're excited to have you all here. I think it's my normal guest friend now, Jonas. How are you doing today, Jonas?
Yeah, as usual, I'm really glad to be here. I've been very excited about this dev stream, so I think we'll have a really good one this time. I'm trying a new microphone.
Yeah, you were talking about that even when we were doing prep. That this is so I think similar to the other one you were really excited about was the narrative story one that we did. So I think it's kind of similar to this. You're really excited talking about the side quest stuff.
Yeah, obviously narrative is my core specialty, and I think side quests are like, yeah, it's usually my favorite part of RPGs, to be honest. You always see some really creative content in that part of the game, so it's been very, very fun for me to write that dev diary on.
Yeah, cool. How have you been? How's life been treating you?
Yeah, been good. Now that everyone is fully vaccinated, we are starting to return to the office, and so it's nice to see people in the flesh for the first time in like a year in some cases.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah, so are some of you back in the office now, or is it it's kind of mixed?
Yeah, we've kind of started. Some people are in. I was in yesterday. Where some of us are doing like an on and off sort of work from home, work from the office thing. But it's up to each individual employee now whether they want to work from home or go to the office. But from September, we should pretty much all be back.
Does it feel? How is the difference between being remote for so long for like the last year and a half, and then actually seeing people face to face for the first time? It's like, oh, I forgot what it was like to see you in person, or is it just like old times? Like, how does it feel?
I mean,
is it weird?
The first time you see someone again, it's like the first couple of days. There's no productivity, right? Because you're spending so much time catching up and talking about. You start talking about the game and shooting the shit about it. It's great. The energy level is way higher in person than when you're meeting over Zoom. The drawback is it can be a little harder to concentrate, but I think it'll settle back. It'll settle back down eventually.
Yeah, I wonder. I'm kind of curious, like that. You end up having, I think, when you're in a studio, like almost a second instinct about how to tune things out because there's always so much going on. I wonder how long it's going to take to get that back as people get back into studios and they're so used to being kind of in their home office and now there's stimulus everywhere again. Is that going to be, like you said, is it really distracting in the beginning?
I'm dreading the time when people remember that now they can just come to my desk and bother me in person. It's been lovely that they had to contact me on Slack and I could just ignore them until I had time, but it'll be fine.
It's hard to ignore someone when they're standing right there being like, hi, hello.
Yeah, I expect the programmers will enjoy having some work from home days from now on so they can still get in the zone and really concentrate.
Programmers are like that. They like squaring themselves off into a corner and just kind of putting their heads down and going to town. I remember at one studio, now we're talking about random stuff. I remember one studio, there was a couple core staff people, and at one point, one of these guys took a whiteboard, like one of the whiteboards on wheels, and rolled it right in front of his desk and kind of built himself his own little like partition. And he wrote on the whiteboard, "Disturb me by penalty of death" on giant letters so that no one could actually, like, he was almost in his little like own little cubicle, and that's how he helped get work done for certain periods of time. That was the only way he'd be able to leave him alone.
That's one of the big problems with game development. Like, you need the designers and the programmers to work really close together, but the design process is super different. Like, you need to be together, you need to be able to have those brainstorms and share the energy. Programmers just need to be alone with the code and really be able to focus for at least like 4 hours at a time. Otherwise they get pulled out of it, they forget what they were doing. It's a tricky one to solve.
Yeah, definitely. We used to have like another studio. We had like quiet hours. We'd have certain hours of the day where you weren't supposed to go bug anybody. Like, they were supposed to be, everyone just does their own thing for at least these hours of the day. Of course, it never quite worked that way because someone would hit a problem and then you get stuck, and it's just the way it goes. But you try.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, I hope you're excited to learn more about side quests. We have quite a bit to go over today. If you haven't read the Dev Diary, it's posted on our community site. It's community.expeditionsseries.com. Really cool diary this week that we're going through side quests. Like Jonas said, side quests are a really interesting topic because I think the Fosse fan club member is here. That's awesome. The side quests are really interesting because they can be, if done right, a really cool point, and I also think sometimes a negative. So like, I already got some of that sensation from the Discord conversations where it's like people are very curious how we're doing them and seem to be optimistic. It's one of those topics that's just like, I mean, there's side quests in every game, right? Like every game has these.
Yeah. It's sort of a staple of the RPG genre in particular. It creates a bit of that open world feel, as I touched on in the diary. It's a part of how you give some agency to the player over the pacing, so that you don't feel railroaded through a big tight story, right? You want some time to take a break from that and just kind of branch off into some tangent of your own discovery, right? I think that's a really important part of why they exist.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from chat while we're getting started here. Like, what games do you have that you think that are very like the side quest, the games that have the side quests that you remember the most, or you like the most? I'd love to hear from chat what kind of ones that they remember. Now this may be go without saying. You kind of hinted at this, but like, why are side quests important? Like, why do all these games have them?
It is, as I mentioned, partly to give the player some agency over their own experience. It's also just it's a world building thing a lot of the time, right? You have some large levels that you can explore in a non-linear fashion in a lot of these games, but you need a reason for the player to explore. You need something for them to discover, something to interact with when they poke their head into some weird corner of the game world. And we really have we have some really beautiful, really detailed levels that the art department have poured so much time into. And it would be a shame if you spend all this time discovering these corners of the game and there's nothing there for you to find. Like, we want to use that space. We want you to feel like there's something there for you to engage with.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like for me, like some of these maps and some of the environments we've built just like scream for immersion. Like, you walk in and you feel like whether it's going into Memphis or one of my favorite maps, the Apollo temple map, and you see this big epic place where all these people should be, and it's almost like if you walked in, you'd expect that someone would be like, hey man, like, I have stuff going on. I think you're right. It definitely helps make those worlds come to life and feel a little more fleshed out.
Yeah, the levels can really scream out for content. Like, when you see what the level designers have done, it motivates you to create content for those places, because you just want to explore all those details, and it's a very fun process.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about this. The game has been in development for a while, so I mean, this is not when we announced it, we've been building it for quite a bit, and it's gone through a number of iterations on the main storyline. I mean, the storyline for the main game itself is pretty extensive. I mean, it goes for a while.
It's huge. It's way bigger than we anticipated.
So, I mean, for a long time, just because of just the sheer work of getting all of the main story figured out and the different iterations, and for all the Fosse fans out there writing all that content, which I think at one point, like, the narrative document was like 100 and something pages long, and that's not even where it ended up being at the end of the day. It took us, I think we spent a long time just focusing on getting all of the main story stuff in. So for a while, there were no side quests. You'd walk in these maps, and to what you're talking about for why they're important, they did kind of feel a little empty, and you just go and do your one main quest or two main quest things and then bounce.
Yeah, and it actually created some problems for us as well, because, as I also touched on in the dev diary, we are used to kind of completing the games chapter by chapter. So we would do all of the main quests and side quests for a particular part of the game before moving on. And that gives you a very clear idea of what the pacing is going to be like. How much freedom is the player going to have to explore and find side content? With Rome, we didn't really have that, because we wanted to finish the main storyline first. So for a while, you just kind of had to take our word for it that it was going to be more open eventually once we got the side quests in there, which fortunately did turn out to be true.
Yeah.
But I mean, the advantage of doing it that way is that we had a much clearer idea of what the themes of the story were going to be, for example, because we had the whole thing finished. We knew how much space we had to fill with side quests, both in terms of the plot itself, like how much narrative space we had to fill, but also how much geographical, like, level space we had to fill, because by that point, all the levels were more or less done. So that was a big advantage to doing it this way.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right about a number of deliveries back in the older days where it's like, I mean, there's not really much going on here, and we're just kind of on rails right now. Is there ever going to be a time where it opens up? And I do think there was that moment where we finally got like the meat and bones of the main story in there, and then it was like, all right, let's now explore side quest. And how do you think that was do you think that was an advantage for us? Do you think it was a disadvantage and a challenge? Like, how do you view that experience?
I think it was better to do it this way than the way we normally do things, because it meant that the main story was a lot tighter in a lot of ways than normal. Like, there's a lot stronger causality there, and it also meant we could better sort of fit in the different side plot beats, because a lot of the side content is companion side quests, for example, that still need multiple beats.
Right.
And you could kind of fit that into specific points and spread it out correctly so that it organically fits with the main story. Like, it was much easier to build the meat onto that skeleton once the whole skeleton was there, right?
Yeah, I think to that point, there's like it also allows us to kind of flesh out kind of character arcs, even with how the main story and how certain like tension moments evolved, so that those side quests could be synced up with where the characters were at certain points, as opposed to trying to like do all of that at one time. We knew where they were and where they were going, and you could kind of like hit those drama moments, whether it be with levity and more fun side quests or more serious ones, kind of at those right points of time.
Yeah, exactly.
I found it quite compelling. I know in the dev diary you talk about how it was more like you I don't want to say trapped, but you placed with restriction all of the designers in a room and just did like a big brainstorming session on side quests. And brainstorming sessions are always fun, but they also can get a little bit I don't want to say unproductive, but when you let everything go on the wall, sometimes things can get complicated. So I thought it very compelling that we had created some guide rails or some kind of like rule sets around how we wanted side quests to work inside of Expeditions Rome.
That was a really important. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really important part of the process, to just guide the creativity, because when you're sitting there with an empty whiteboard and 5 designers in a room, it can get difficult to get started, and it's really important to have a strong set of constraints to guide the process, and also just to get you thinking. So that was something I had set out before we started the meeting. I came to that meeting with the rules, and we started out by going over them and discussing what that meant and why each rule existed. And I think extra rules were added during that discussion, as well as people suggested further constraints. Constraints are definitely your friend as a game designer.
Yeah, I think it's so you had those kind of like parameters established before you walked into the room. We're gonna go through them now, but I'd be really curious, maybe our audience can brainstorm some side quest ideas for us on the forums. It'd be great to see how they would participate in the brainstorming process, since we have a lot of fans of both Expeditions games as well as just Roman history in general. As you learn more and more, maybe we can do like a group brainstorming exercise just for fun. But in order to do that, we got to go through the rules. So like, let's walk through. I think there's 4 of them, 3 rules. We had 3 rules. So the first one was side quests must be pull content. So what do we mean by pull content? Can you explain that to why that rule exists and why it's important?
I think it's a term I have from the creators of BioShock. I think that was a GDC talk where they mentioned pull and push.
Okay.
And most of their story is pull content. Like, you can play through the whole game without it actually really engaging with the narrative at all. But if you start poking around in the corners of the level, reading the little notes lying around, listening to the audio diaries, like, then you start to get all of the story. But it's purely optional, right? So to me, in RPG terms, pull content means that we place this content in the game world for you to find. You don't have to find it in order to complete the game. Main quests are usually push content. Like, if you don't have a main quest active, the next one will be given to you immediately, right? So that you have something to do. You always know what your next step in progressing the story is. But pull content, as in the side quests, you have to go looking for that. You have to explore in order to find it, and that makes it feel more like it belongs to you when you find it, which is a very important part of that experience.
Yeah, I think I don't think I ever saw that GDC talk on BioShock, but BioShock was a master at that. You could speedrun that game and go through kind of the main story stuff relatively quickly, but the world brought you into exploring it really quickly, and you found all those little nuggets, and it definitely opened up a lot. I think the Fallout series is also really good at that. Fallout 3 was another great example of there's a ton that you just can decide to do or not do, and that's completely up to you. So that was important for us, I guess, in how we were designing our side quest content.
Yeah, it was one of the defining features of what distinguished side content from main content, was that you had to go looking for it, and if you didn't find it, that's fine. The game would continue. You wouldn't be blocked from doing anything.
Okay, cool. So rule number 2, going on. The next one was that side quests must respect the player character's station. Now this is one I saw a lot of response on Discord about, and I think was super important, especially in what I call like fetch quest type design. So that's I guess to add context to people that haven't read the dev diary, what do we mean by that when we say respect the player's the character's station?
I know why that resonated with people, because it's such a sin that so many role-playing games in particular tend to commit, that you go looking for side content and what you get is like, oh, go and buy my groceries for me, or get my cat out of the sewer or something, right? And you're like, I'm a important hero. I have fighting skills and magic. Why do I have to go and do these menial things?
There's I think some of that's also because many of us play MMOs, and I think the MMO genre also kind of drilled that into the ground, because once you played you play like your second MMO, much less like your 5th or 6th, and you're like, how many of these towns am I going to go to where I have to kill 7 sheep or pick 5 flowers or whatever? There's actually a very fun YouTube channel that I follow called, I think it's called Viva La something or other, and they do an entire series called Epic NPC Man, and they have a couple of those where like this epic hero comes in and he has to go pick up flowers at the end to 100% complete this one town. And at this point he's like beaten the dragon and done all these stuff, and he's like looking at the farmer going, you couldn't get this flower? Oh no, I got it for you. How about this one? Oh okay, I'll get that one too. He's just like, I guess I'll do this. Here's your quest, right? There you go. Exactly. I think that's the station thing.
Yeah, and it's particularly like, it would be extra heinous in a game like Expeditions Rome, where from quite early in the game you're put in command of this legion of 6,000 veteran soldiers, and you have all that military power at your command. You're the son or daughter of a noble family, and then what are the kind of things that they would ask you to do? And it sort of ties into something that wasn't really a rule as such, but that was more of a rule in the main story, that you're mostly not working for the locals. You're working with the locals, but you are working for Rome. You are Roman general, and all of the things that you do in the main storyline are to advance the agenda of Rome and your own personal storyline, of course. So unlike in the previous games where you would often just walk up to, a local king and ask if they had any jobs for you or anything you could do for them to build reputation with them, which is also like a standard RPG thing. Here, most of the main content comes from Rome, and that also ties into this rule about you are a legate of Rome, you will not be doing menial tasks for anyone. And that rule can be broken if there's a really good reason for it narratively. We don't do it often. When we do, we have good reason to do it.
Yeah, you can imagine like Eisenhower being the supreme commander of the Allied army walking into a town, and someone's like, hey, I forgot this package. Do you mind go getting it for me and bringing it back? And it's like, you gotta be kidding me, right? But games break that all the time. So I think it's very compelling that was important to us, that we didn't, we put the players' rank, I guess, or where they're at in context of what kind of things people either ask them to do or things that you would acknowledge that being willing to do. That exactly. I think it helps with immersion too. It helps build the world and the story around them. Hey, DGIs, oh good lord, DGISMA. How do I pronounce that? Dijma 69, DGISMA 69. I don't know. I can't. Hi, your name is hard to pronounce.
Yo.
Isma. Oh, that's right. You go by the end part of your name. DJ Isma. Gotcha. He likes to spin. He likes to spin Isma. Get it? All right. So rule number 3, last but not least. So and this is a little bit more verbose, but it's all good. So must include at least one of the following aspects in order to be considered a side quest. So it needs to either feature combat, present the player with an interesting and important choice, contribute to the portrayal of a major supporting character, contribute significantly to the world building, strongly support the core theme of the game, or relate directly to the main plot. Okay, that's a lot. There's a lot of different parameters there. But I kind of get it, right? Like this is so that the side quests have some focus on how they're created.
It was presented as an itemized list in the brainstorm, so that they didn't have to deal with that paragraph. But yes, it's there so that every side quest feel meaningful in some way. There's a reason for it to exist. It's actual content, basically. It's not just filler. It's not just grind. There's a reason for it to be there, something that can hook the player and make it feel like it was worthwhile when you finish it.
Yeah, it makes sense. I thought that the, by the way, Imperial Stormtrooper Marksmanship Academy, is that what it stands for, Isma? Is that like, is it an acronym? I'd be curious if Dreamkin got that right. If that's true, that's kind of cool. I thought that it was interesting that, not all of them had to feature combat, right? So in order to have the side quest, there was like different ways that you could satisfy that requirement.
Almost all of our main quests have combat as part of them. Sometimes you can get out of the combat if you play your cards right, but most of the time diplomacy will really just change the parameters of the combat. There's almost always a fight somewhere in a main quest, to the point where I think we have one main quest where we were specifically like, let's have this main quest not have combat, and then how are we gonna make that really interesting? That was the one Fassi went through when he was on here for the narrative stream.
The one that you loved getting implemented.
Yeah, exactly. That was a hell to implement because we felt like we had to compensate for the fact there was no combat by adding complexity to the general exploration and diplomacy. But for side quests, it's different because they are by nature smaller, and we felt like that would be our chance to add some variation in terms of what are the challenges that the player will face here. We wanted to make sure that some of the side quests did not include combat, and combat in side quests is much more often completely optional than it is in the main quests, because sometimes you'll find a side quest, you'll figure out a way to get out of it without a fight, and then the side quest will feel much smaller because combat is such a big and time-consuming part of the game. But that's fine because it's a side quest. It doesn't have to feel like a giant chunk of content.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. It sounds like it's a really, I think all 3 of these rules, they have a lot of core parameters that really, I think when you look at them together, help. There's still a lot of brainstorming, a lot of wide things you can do around them. But I can understand, that focus in allowing the designers to at least feel like they had goals. It's almost like goal setting. These are the goals we want to achieve with how our side quests feel in the game.
Yeah. It was just good for us to have this checklist to both guide our creativity and also ensure that what we were coming up with was good stuff instead of just being useless filler.
Yeah, definitely. So let's dive into some of the quest examples. I think you have a number of them in the diary. It'd be useful for our audience to kind of like show what these quests are, and then maybe even how the guidelines were deployed there. So in the dev diary, we talked through a side quest in Memphis. And why don't you kind of walk the audience through how this quest worked and what it's about?
The tax collectors, as the quest is called, came from one of the core themes of the game being, the Roman legion as this invading force that you're in charge of, like you're the conqueror. And we wanted to show some of the knock-on effects of that, like what kind of effects does that have on the local population? So this quest, the premise of it is you're walking around exploring Memphis, and you stumble upon some Berber warriors that have been captured by the local Egyptians.
So I actually, what is a Berber warrior? You mentioned that in the diary, and I had no idea what that was.
The Berbers were the people of North Africa, one of the peoples of North Africa at the time. They still exist. They're still a cultural group.
Okay.
So the Berbers were, in this case, the tribes of Nasamonis, the Nasamonian tribes, are Berbers. They're a Berber people. And during the course of the quest, you can recruit some of them for your legion as auxiliaries. So you find some of these captured by the Egyptians in Memphis. And because they are fighting for you, you are their commander, they call out to you and ask you to resolve the situation because they've been captured and they want you to free them. And that leads to this whole, like, you can start questioning them. Obviously the soldier has good reason for having captured them. They've been doing illegal things, but from their perspective, you know, they control this area now. They're a member of a Roman legion and invading force. They can do whatever they want. And now you have to decide what kind of commander you want to be, what kind of legion you want to be in charge of. Is it okay for your people to menace the civilians in this way? It's not the only piece of content we have that poses this question to you, so it's part of a pattern. But that's the choice at the heart of the quest.
Oh, okay, cool. So first off, I'd be curious if anyone in chat knew what the Berber people were. I feel a little bit, I didn't realize. I know, obviously, I've learned a lot about Nasamanus. It's such a big focus, but I didn't realize they were part of a bigger cultural group. So that's my ignorance showing a little bit there. So this is very compelling. Actually, when I read the dev diary, I didn't really connect this, but when I read the dev diary, when we were going through the dev diary, I didn't connect this. But so it's in a way kind of, like we talked about in the rules, it's reflecting the player's fantasy of what kind of, because I mean, I guess technically you're right. You're a Roman legion and a conqueror. You can rape and pillage, so to speak. You can be fair. Like, you have the ability to be the kind of, not just directly in the kind of commander that you are in the actions that you take, but indirectly in the kind of actions you sanction or punish based on what what other people do.
The choices you have here really span the whole range of how do you role play as a Roman general in this case. You can actually just leave them to the mercy of the Egyptians. Go like, well, it seems like justice was done here. You stole. You're going to face consequences. It doesn't matter that you're part of a Roman legion. You did something illegal, and I will let the locals punish you. You can try to get them handed over to you by promising the Egyptians that you will make them face justice under Roman military law, and then you can follow up on that by going to your camp prefect and actually arranging punishment for them. Or you can even go, no, these are Roman legionaries and they can do whatever they want. They are my responsibility, and I don't care about the locals. I don't care about Egyptians. You are not Romans, so we will impose our will and our greed upon you, essentially. And then that obviously, no spoiler, not much of a spoiler here, but that will obviously lead to a fight, right? Because they are,
of course.
The Egyptians will not
they don't like that.
No.
Yeah, I imagine not, right? I think that it's I'm gonna geek out for a second, but it's part of what I love so much about the storytelling mechanics inside of Expeditions Rome. It has this sense of and I feel like I overuse this term, but organic weight to it, where like you walk into these scenarios and you imagine that these kind of things will happen. Like, and they definitely did happen. And there's a lot of historical evidence about what would happen when conquerors would come into an area. How, like, even not just the people that, because I mean, when you were running these armies, you would recruit from the local population too. You couldn't just use the people that you're far way from Rome. It's a long trek back. It's not like you can jump on a plane and get back in a couple hours. It's a long journey. So if you're going to refill your ranks, so to speak, sometimes you do recruit local, and there's drama in that always, right? And sometimes the drama can be very personal, but it can be reflected in more of a meta level where people in charge have to make a decision on what kind of conquerors they're going to be. And that's such a historical context that then comes to life in this kind of personal way where you can make these decisions and then punish them or not punish them, or be like, nope, we're going to hack and slash. And I mean, I love that. It happens a lot in different ways throughout our own story. And I think to the point of side quests, like, it's not a main quest kind of topic often. Sometimes it is, but it should come up because that's just the way the world works.
It always helps to put a human face on these kinds of questions as well, right? By having, like, this guy, he has a name, he has a character model, he exists in the game world, like, he becomes a real person in a way, at least for the duration of the side quest. And you can question him about his motivations, why he did these things, how he feels about it. You know, some nuances come out there as well. So hopefully by the end of asking everyone their views on things, it won't feel like such a black and white question. Your role-playing choice will definitely guide you in what choice you want to make there, but it's also about your personal feelings on the situation of who is actually in the right here. And then you can choose to just act according to your own modern morals and say, like, with my 21st century morals, I would I would let them punish this guy because he committed a war crime essentially. But
Yeah.
maybe you want to roleplay a bit more and going like, yeah, but a Roman general probably would just say, no, to hell with you. You're civilians and you don't matter. So you have to make that kind of decision, which is where like the whole moral aspect of the expedition series in general usually shines the most, I think.
I think it's also where the morale system kind of comes into play too, because how you make those choices also impacts the way that your troops view you and how excited they are. And you may have other knock-on effects of if you play a certain role too hard-lined, as you mentioned, a certain way, like your 21st century morals or whatever. That may not sit well with certain types of soldiers that are valuable to you, and that may cause other problems down the line. So it's definitely a balancing act between those roles you decide to play, I guess.
Yeah, and there's two sides to that as well, because sure, we still have the approval of each of your followers who are in your Praetorian Guard, but now in Rome you also have the Legion, and the Legion has its own morale as well. So if you let the locals punish these people, which is kind of like objectively the right thing to do in a modern moral context, your Legion is not going to appreciate that. They will lose morale when they hear about the fact that you have let them be subject to local law, right? That's not something they're happy about at all.
Yeah, I know that comes up a lot in history, where it's like certain generals would try at times to stop their troops from pillaging, but that was a very historical common thing to do, right? Like you would go and conquer a land, and part of the it's almost like your bonus, right? Like and you think about like Christmas bonuses in modern times. If you're a soldier in ancient times, your Christmas bonus was the pillaging that you got from a place that you conquered to take back and create your own estate and the gold and whatever you grabbed. And some of the people that tried to stop that from happening, their soldiers would sometimes revolt and sometimes just kill them and do it anyways, because or they would just leave them to fight with an army that wasn't there anymore, because it's like, well, if I can't bring home wealth, then why am I out here in the first place? Like, why am I risking my life on this expedition?
Yeah, I remember reading that the Lucullus had that problem because he was against war pillaging generally, and his people were not.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Lucullus was not a fan of that. He believed in treating his enemies well and so on, and he got into some trouble with his troops because of that.
Yeah, I guess it puts a different also weight on from the home country as well, because in the Roman situation it means that you have to pay them people somehow some way else, right? If you're not bringing back wealth from your conquest, then you got to bring back wealth from your people, and they're not going to appreciate that. So it's like, why do we take over all these lands if we don't benefit from it? Like, what's the point? So yeah.
These are the kinds of things that side quest offers you space to explore these themes where there might not really be space for it in the main story, because there's so many other things the main story needs to deal with.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. So how do you run into these? This quest particularly, I think, is kind of interesting, because this just happens when you're walking around, right? Like you're just walking around Memphis and some guy's like, hey, I'm in a cage, right? Like it just kind of chirps at you or whatever.
Yeah, there are some conditions that need to be met. You can visit Memphis really quite early. It's fairly out of the way in terms of where you start in Africa, but you could go straight to Memphis if you wanted. And by that point, you haven't really had a chance to recruit any Berber auxiliaries. That's a difficult word. So they're not going to be around. Like if you visit Memphis before you actually recruit any of these people, you're not going to find anything there. It's going to be empty. So it's only later on, once you have these people in your army, then as you are exploring Memphis, you'll just stumble into them over in the corner, and you can choose to involve yourself in that situation, or you could just walk past them and ignore them.
Okay. I think that there's so some of the quests also you can go like, is it usually in side quests that someone chirps at you and you kind of have that context, or is it sometimes you're talking to someone and a side quest comes up? Like, what are the different ways that you get introduced to this content? Like, you talk about exploring and finding it. Like, what mechanisms do we use to bring them about so the player notices them?
It can happen a few different ways. One of the ways is, you might get someone shouting at you and like waving. You have to come over and talk to them, or just walk past.
Okay.
Sometimes, you're talking to a major character. You just strike up a conversation with them after they're done, maybe briefing you on the main mission or whatever. And then they're like, oh, before you go, I have something I need help with, or there's an opportunity that you might wish to sort of pursue. So there's a couple of different ways. Usually the quests that are there to sort of build the character of a specific major NPC, such as Cleopatra or Julius Caesar. Spoiler alert. We've mentioned that before. Those will come up if you're just talking to them, going through their default dialogue, like just because you want to talk to them and learn more about them, and you can find opportunities that way. So I would encourage you to talk to everyone whenever you can.
Yeah, I feel like that's a I don't know how, and I'd be curious in chat how people play, but I know when I play, I'm always trying to go through every dialogue option to see if I can find the quest that maybe I miss, so I don't miss any of them.
These side quests are there for players like you. Yeah.
Yeah. I always found it particularly challenging. I'm going to name drop Mass Effect. Mass Effect was always tricky because you had all of those different dialogue options that would pop up every time I went back to the Normandy, and you're like, oh gosh, I have to talk to everybody again, just in case one of them decides to tell me this time that they need help with something. I don't want to miss it by progressing too fast. Yeah, well, it's also kind of a FOMO thing, right? You don't want to miss out on one of those. So you're trying to make sure you find all the little bits. So let's go through this Memphis quest real quick and talk about, and some of we've already talked about as we go, but just to make sure we cover all of them. So let's go through the 3 points and make sure we followed our rules. So I had to go back to my rule list. So rule list 1, side quest must be pull content. So I think it satisfies that.
Yeah, you have to explore that part of Memphis. If you never even walk into that corner of the map, the main mission isn't going to send you up there. So you have to explore to find that quest. You have to choose to talk to that guy.
Okay. Rule number 2, side quest must respect the player character's station. Talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, like he needs someone who's in charge, someone who has a lot of power to throw around, because you need someone who can overrule the authority of the local soldiers. You are the most in charge guy, and you are hopefully on his side from his perspective. So you're really the only person, like from his perspective, huge stroke of luck that you happen to wander past at this particular point. Maybe a little contrived, but it's video game logic. And you're exactly the person he needs for this.
You can't. I know you and I have had, I'm going to say, discussions about serendipity a number of times.
Yeah.
At some point you have to just kind of like bow your head to the serendipity gods, and you can do.
Yeah.
And then rule number 3, which I'm not going to go through everything, but it must include one of those parameters like combat or world building or whatever. How many of those does it conform to?
It conforms to almost all of them. It doesn't really talk about any major characters, but it gives you an important choice, which does ask you a question about your morals and what kind of character you're playing. It can lead to combat in quite a few different ways. And it is a world building thing as well. It talks to the main themes of the story: conquest, oppression, the burdens of leadership, and it also builds the world a little bit. And it tells you, your legion is a presence. Your people travel and they do things without your approval. You might not always be totally in control of them. So it touches on almost every single rule.
Cool. So it looks like this quest is a rule follow. We have all 3 follow. That's good.
Green check mark.
Awesome. So, are there any? Well, actually, and I think it's a good segue because someone is actually talking about the companion. So, changing gears a little bit from like the main quest parts. There are a whole section of side quests that I think are almost side quest plus, like they're a little bit bigger than side quests, which are about the companion characters. If everyone, for anyone who's not familiar with how the companions work, Expeditions Rome has kind of the main character, but also has a cast of companions that you get to know and you journey with throughout your entire game experience, and they're kind of your lieutenants, or your main people that you rely upon, and they have a lot of dimensions to them. They're 3-dimensional characters with backstories and history, and you form quite detailed relationships with them. So we have these companion side quests. Let's talk a little bit about these in the next 10 or 15 minutes we have before we go to questions. So what are companion side quests?
Yeah, companion side quests only trigger if you have that companion with you, which you usually will when you're just exploring. There's still pull content in most cases, but some of them actually do get sort of presented to you. Like the companion themselves will come up to you and say, I have something here that I need help with. It happens fairly organically. And they have multiple steps because the companions are with you throughout the entire game, throughout the entire story. So we can sort of have them take place over a long period of time, because the main game takes place over like 10 years of time, as can the companion side quest. So you have time to really develop the the core problem at the heart of each companion. Figure out what is it that their character arc is. What prevents them from being happy, from being a complete person, from being, resolved. What ails them, and then how can you help them with that? And usually they'll be failable. Like there'll actually be multiple different states where you can help them, you can fail to help them, or you can not choose to help them and just ignore that quest. And each outcome will reflect that like the resolution of that companion in the main storyline.
Yeah, I feel like it's an opportunity, I guess, for you to get to know more about each of the companions, but also get to decide what kind of relationship you want to have with them. Do you want to support them no matter what? Do you want to play your role and decide what you approve of and what you don't, or what kind of things you're willing to do for them? Do you want to just speedrun it and forget about them and not develop them at all? Like, there's different choices you get to make there.
It's kind of like game writing 101. I think I picked up this rule from Chris Avallone, but it's like, if you want the player to care about a character, have them do something really useful and good for you, and then have you do something for them. And so if there's like that reciprocal relationship, you'll like them, you'll care about them, and it always works. It's a great way to make the player actually give a shit. Yeah.
Ismet asked a question that I'll say I'll partially answer as we go. So he's asking, can companions die, or do they just get knocked out? And in combat, companions are you're not gonna like have a companion get attacked in a combat sequence and then die from it, and then now they're out of the game. So no, there are some like gamified special rules about companions when it comes to how they get injured or triage managed or whatever in combat.
They can. Yeah, like there's an option when you begin the game to have combat death on or off. Whether you want characters to be able to die outright in combat, if you have that one off, they will always only have an injury that then needs to be treated. But injuries can deteriorate, and if a character dies from an injury, if they're non-companion, then they're gone. They'll just die and you have to replace them. If they are companion, that's a game over. So they can die, but it ends the game.
Oh.
Right? Yeah. You get a big fat warning on screen that tells you, one of your companions is about to die. You need to deal with that.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, they're kind of important to the story, so you can't have one of them just be like not there anymore.
So in that way, they're treated the same as the player character. The player character can also die from their injuries, and that's also obviously the end of that story. Right?
Yeah, makes sense. So, now how are these? What I also find interesting is that these unlike the side, so a lot of the side quests are somewhat self-contained in a sense that they take place in one part of the game. So just as a reminder for the fans that don't know how the game is structured, the game happens in 3 arcs. So we have Greece, which is in one time period, and you end up going back to Rome after the Greece campaign is done. And there's a little bit of a time skip, and then you have the North African campaign, and then you end up going back to Rome. There's another time skip, and then you have the Gaul campaign. You go back to Rome. So we have these 3 main areas of the world you explore, and to a certain degree, time zones. That's the wrong way to say it. Moments in time where they take place, a period of time where they take place. And for almost all side quests, they're self-contained, where they kind of take place in that moment in time. Like you go to Memphis, it starts and stops there. The companion quests are a little bit different though, because they kind of key off things that can take place over the course of these arcs. Like you don't necessarily just finish one of them in Greece and it's done. You may finish a part of it, but other things are going to happen, which I think is kind of cool. They really do feel like almost like secondary storylines that get birthed from these different moments, but they follow the side quest rules.
They are B plots, right? It's standard storytelling thing. Wonderful to be making a game where there's space for that kind of stuff. You have your main storyline, like the player character has their own character arc that takes place at the same time as the main storyline that intersects with it, and then the companions each have their own character arc that unfolds as well. They have their own problems they're dealing with, and the great thing about the time skips is, things can happen off screen. There's been pass, and then something new has happened in this character's life. They'll catch you up to speed on it, and it feels like they have their own, they have their own stuff going on. There's a bigger world out there that happens without you. And in a lot of cases, as we've touched on in previous Dev Diaries, you get to play as that companion as part of their main quest, which is really cool. Like you get to control that companion and speak as them and make that dialogue decisions as them for a short while. And I think that's just I'm so glad we got that in, because it adds a whole new dimension to it, that they can do stuff without you there. They have their own stuff going on.
Yeah, and just how it also, I think, is part of helping to reflect how important they are. You know, like you said, they're part of the main aspect of the game. If they do die, it's game over. I mean, they are. It's in a way, even though you do have your persona, it is a party type persona, because they're, you know, these people reflect the whole. You're going through this experience together, which I think is really.
It emphasizes the ensemble cast nature of the game.
Yeah. Now, I guess there's one more class of side quest worth mentioning real quick before we kind of go to questions. We talked about this a little bit. We call them unlisted quests. So, what are unlisted quests?
They're basically any kind of quest-like content that doesn't show up in the quest log. So there's no name for it. There's no description of what you're doing. You don't feel like, oh, I am now on this content, and you won't be handheld through it. Sometimes you have to really pay attention to what's going on. For this reason, they're usually a bit smaller, so it's not like you have to remember that you got something 20 hours ago and now here's the payoff. You can usually follow up on it immediately, but they can still be quite involved. Some of them are little riddles. A lot of them are basically like using the crafting system, as in, here's a broken sword that must be reforged, and it, you know, from thousands of years ago, and it has something really special about it, and there's multiple steps to go through to figure out how to reforge this blade, which is a way to use the crafting system in a more quest-like way. It's quite cool.
Yeah. I know in the Dev Diary we talked about the what was it called? The ancient weapon. I know we can't spoil those. That sounds super exciting. Like some way to. I mean, is there anything you can kind of tease about that? Like, what do we mean when we say ancient weapon?
They are often like weapons either that are real archaeological artifacts, where like something that actually exists in the real world, and we're like, oh, this should be in the game, right? This is a real thing. Like, I guess we can spoil one because it's sort of like, it's a real thing that exists. So Tutankhamon Stagger, right, is an actual like meteorite dagger made out of meteorite metal, which is which was found under a pyramid in King Tut's tomb. And we were like, well, obviously we need to have that in the game. So you can find that, but it's not in a great state, and you'll need to figure out how to get that reforged. And it's not straightforward. It's made out of a metal nobody is really familiar with. So there's some steps you need to take, some people you need to talk to figure out how this thing should be reforged, and you end up using the crafting system to construct the weapon in the end, and that feels really satisfying. And there's multiple things like that, usually tied to historical characters or real artifacts, which makes it extra cool, I think. You can look it up on Wikipedia when you get it, right?
Man, we should have gotten the Tutankhamon dagger picture for the stream. We could have showed that. That's really cool. I never heard of that before. Meteor dagger. That's a certain level of flashy for ancient Egyptian times, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's from a time they didn't even really know how to work with iron, but then you have this meteorite iron that just fell from the sky, and it's like sky metal. So obviously they had to forge a weapon for a king out of it.
Yeah, and it's also kind of like I think it's really interesting because maybe it was probably considered like a weapon of the gods because it came from the sky. So there's a whole different tier of mythology and what around it. That's super cool. Didn't know about that. So we're gonna go into questions, but I know there was one thing that you didn't mention, and so I'm gonna just throw it right to you, which is you had a specific quest you want to talk about when we were talking about the rule sets, because there was this whole one of the rules we did break a little bit, and you wanted to mention that. So the rule that we broke, I guess specifically, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, but it's just fun to talk about. It was the rule about every quest having to respect the character's station, that you're a general.
So the great thing about having rules is that then you can very deliberately break them when it suits you and when it has some kind of effect, and you will be asked to do something by Cleopatra, which is absolutely not something you should ask a Roman general to do. It is way beneath your station. It's basically a menial task. But obviously she has her reasons. She has underlying motives for asking you that. It's a power play, right? And that is just an awesome character moment, I think. I think this was Fas's idea. Like he was like, Cleopatra would not respect your station. She would ask you to do something stupid just to prove that she's in charge, right?
Exactly.
So it's
Cleopatra's Cleopatra, and if she tells you to do something, even if you're a general, you're like, all right, I guess I have to do it because you're Cleopatra, and that's just the way this world works.
But then you have many different ways you can do that. You can, of course, tell her, no, I'm not doing that. I'm a general, and I'm not your servant. or you can complete her quest in multiple different ways. You can go the whole way and get her what she wants, but you can also cut corners and you can deliberately disrespect her. And it's all about exploring what your relationship to Cleopatra is. And she might not react the way you expect depending on how you complete that quest. It's a great character moment.
Yeah, that's super cool. Well, let's go into questions. We have 2 questions we're going to take from Discord, and then we have a number we'll take from chat. So we're going to start out with one from the Dev Diary. And again, community.expeditionseries.com, where the Dev Diaries are posted. If you ever go on there and post a question, I check them always the night before and grab those questions for the stream, so you'll get your question answered, or at least visited here. So the first one is from Bombo Lee. I'm not sure if he's on chat or he or she is on chat, but they basically talk a little bit about the quest design themselves. So particularly love side quests that give me the latitude to define myself more fully as a character in the world. Who am I really beyond this chosen one / savior? The best side quests are the ones which help me care about the world I'm about to save, and give me impactful objectives to overcome, by which process I can more readily understand and define myself. So they're really talking about just the ability to kind of define who you are and make those kind of character decisions. So for relationships, they're kind of this person asks, how do I shape the relationships around me? Are the side quests giving you a way to do kind of like a loyalty missions, similar to Mass Effect 2, which were majestic, or how do we do these when it comes to allowing these relationships to be improved? And I guess this really just talk about the companion side quest more than anything else.
There are also, as like the Cleopatra side mission is a way for you to shape your relationship with an NPC who is in a companion. There's a few of these where major NPCs will ask you to do stuff and help with things, but of course it is more pronounced in the companion side quests, and it's not quite as, I definitely don't want to criticize Mass Effect 2, because that's one of my favorite games of all time, like top 3 easily, but it could get a little formulaic. Like they had a specific structure that every single, like there was the initial recruitment quest, then there was the loyalty quest, and that was it, right? And ours are a little bit more different. Like each companion has their own way that their companion quests play out, and without giving anything away, one of them can even die in their companion quest, which isn't really a normal thing for how companion quests work. So it's a bit more varied, I think, than in Mass Effect 2, but it functions fundamentally in the same way. Yeah, it's your chance to engage with someone with their own personal problems and decide how deep your relationship really goes, how far you're willing to go for them. And also it's not just like, do I want to help this person or not? It's also, how do I want to solve this person's problem? And what does that tell them about me?
Yeah, definitely. The next question I have, this is off of Discord, which I grabbed because I guess this person was having problems getting on the Dev Diary, from Energized Camel. Sometimes reading these names are hard about capitalizations. They're all just like a whole bunch of consonants and vowels. Energized Camel asks, are there any other games in particular which inspire the type of side quest you want? What are your favorite side quests you've seen in a game, and what made it so memorable? Or alternatively, which side quest in Vikings or Conquistadors was your favorite and why? So I think this is really more of an inspiration question. How do we where do we draw inspiration for how we design our side quests?
I have promised Hans, since he couldn't be on the stream, that I would answer this question on his behalf, because he wanted to point to the sword quest in Expeditions Viking as one of his most favorite quests, and one of the ones that was his touchstone when we had this brainstorm. And that is a quest where you're told, or you're hired essentially by a merchant to retrieve a sword that was stolen from him by a bandit. You're this wandering mercenary warrior chieftain kind of, so he's like, he figures you know how to handle a sword. I've been robbed, I can't move on from this shitty town until I get my items back, and so he stole my armor, he stole my sword. You can go and grab that, and then you come back. And what makes this quest a bit special, both in Viking terms, but also why it stood out so much to Hans, was that if you wear those items when you come back and you tell him you didn't find them, he detects that. Like, he can see you're wearing his stuff, and he gets very angry with you because you're like standing there wearing his armor, telling you, no, I'm sorry, he didn't have it anymore, I don't know what happened to it. And then you're like, you bastard, and then he attacks you. And you're not used to games noticing that kind of stuff. Like, you think you outsmarted the game, but it has outsmarted you, and I think that's why he loved that.
That's amazing.
Personally and generally, I would say that, as I mentioned, Mass Effect 2, big inspiration for how to do character quests. And then The Witcher 3, I would say, is one of the games that has the most involved world quests. Like, you can stumble into really complex and compelling content hidden away in some corner of the world. No care about whether you're actually ever going to find that. And that was also one of our touchstones. Like, no content there feels like filler.
Yeah. I do think we have. I don't know if you've been watching chat at all. There's the fun debate of the female legate is raging on in Twitch chat, and this whole DevStream. By the way, I wasn't ignoring the conversation. We try to keep the topics of the streams focused on the topics of the diaries, so we can give people the content that they're looking for when they tune in. But I do think we'll touch on it in the last 5 minutes, because it's something that's come up quite a bit about the historical accuracy of being able to be a female combatant and legatus in the Roman times, and we've talked about this quite a bit. And I think one aspect of it that Jonas and I have mentioned in previous streams, but I think we'll mention it again here, is that historically speaking, Lucullus had absolute authority at this moment in history. He could do whatever the heck he wanted. So as far as plausibility is concerned, though it didn't happen, if someone that had that station in the Roman Empire at the time wanted to promote a female to be a warrior, legally they could do that. I mean, they were able to do whatever they wanted.
It's sort of it's like historically it's always been a backdoor into power for women in societies that don't respect women and that don't want women to hold any power. You are at least able to achieve power through men, right? If you have a very young son, you'll be the queen regent until he grows up. If you are married, like Livia, who was married to Augustus, held huge amounts of power. And everyone just accepted that because essentially it was his power that she was wielding. And in Rome, it's sort of the same way. Like, you are basically wielding Lucullus's power for a large part of the game. We have chosen to stretch plausibility a little bit with that. It's a choice you can make as a player. If you don't want that experience, you can make a male character, and then it'll play out more like what history probably would indicate.
Yeah, but I do think it's interesting to note that when you're playing as a female character, this is not something that is just accepted. So it comes up quite often throughout the story where people are challenging the authority that Lucullus gave you, and then even as that authority becomes owned on your own because of your actions and the things that you've done, there are some people in Rome that accept it because you've obviously proven yourself as an extraordinary person in this world, and there are some that never really accept it because that just doesn't make any sense to them. So I think in the game, if you decide to go through that experience, obviously it is a little bit of a stretch, but we thought that it was a creative challenge to explore how the world may react to something like this. Because at the end of the day, it's a fantasy. We are creating not historically accurate stories. We're creating stories based on a very well thought out and well drawn historical setting. And sometimes that does challenge different things. Obviously, the way that the plot goes out in our game is not what happened in actual history. But I actually personally really like the fact that this version of the story exists, not just because it attracts new players. That's part of it, but I think a bigger part of it is what would happen if something like this were to take place, and what are the ways that the world would react. And I feel like the writing team has done a very interesting job exploring that, while still allowing the plot to develop the way that the plot should. I think I definitely understand. We wanted to make a game that different players who want to experience different types of worlds can go and explore. But I think you'll be surprised at how dynamic the world reacts to that choice if you decide to play the female hero. It's not the way you may expect. There are a lot of challenges that are different for the female character because it's a different the history responds differently at that point in time.
Yeah.
I don't know if I reflected that well, to be honest. I tried to.
Pretty much summed it up. It's all about player agency and player choice, and we've definitely tried to make it feel like a much more important choice, precisely because Rome was historically such a patriarchal sexist, frankly, society, modeling itself on the Greek society, which is also incredibly sexist. And you'll meet quite a few sexists in the game, especially if you're a woman. Those were the people that lived back then. Yeah, we've taken some of the historical characters and made them more open, more progressive to that kind of stuff, just to make the story work. But ultimately, these were people that lived 2,000 years ago, so you don't always know what they think about things.
You know, what's really compelling is sometimes I've read some of what certain people did, like Caesar or some of the other like dictators of the Republic even era, and I mean they did other things that were, in my opinion, equally ridiculous to even the cultural norms of Rome at the time. I mean, when you got to be the point where you were a dictator of Rome, appointed by and you were a consul, you were a god. You could do whatever the heck you wanted. It was really hard for someone to challenge that during that power cycle.
Especially if you're an imperator on a war campaign, like currently engaged in a military campaign, there's not much anyone can do to stop you, no matter what you want to do, basically. So
it may have consequences later on down the stream if it doesn't work out, but in that moment, yeah.
Once you return to Rome after your military campaign, then there might be hell to pay, right? But that's a problem for future Lucullus. Or future...
Right. Lucullus, and well, speaking of Lucullus, he definitely did pay for some of his decisions he made during his time as that imperator. But that's a topic for a different conversation. It's actually really, if you dive into that aspects of Roman history, some of it's really compelling about how extreme their decisions were and where the consequences didn't end up coming out, whether they were successful or not successful. I mean, to a certain degree, Caesar did pay the ultimate price for some of those choices he made leading up to that. And those costs that, I think some of the reason why Caesar died is not because of what he did at the end. It's all the stuff he did leading up to that point when he had that power as an actual consul. People didn't appreciate some of those choices. But
yeah, I mean that was the difference between him and Augustus. Augustus
played
right. Politically,
yeah. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed the stream. We had a lot of fun talking about side quests and a little bit of fun on the end with some historical context. Hopefully that those answered provide some fresh content for the debate. Jonas, I hope it was as exciting as you thought it was going to be talking about side quests.
I had lots of fun. I will definitely keep talking about side quests for the next 3 hours if you don't cut the stream.
Please join us again in about 3 weeks. I will be updating the calendar on the community site, community.expeditionseries.com. We now have the next 2 or 3 dev streams locked in. We have topics almost established that Jonas is about to send me over. The next 2 or 3 topics. So we'll actually put the calendar out for the next couple of streams, and we hope you join. This also will be on YouTube soon, so you can watch it there. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care, everyone. Cheers.
Yeah.